On today's episode of the CLS Experience, we have a very special treat. Simply put, he is the American dream, moving to the US from Colombia. He overcame his father going to jail while him and his sister ended up in a foster home. His home was raided by law enforcement, helicopters soaring, and guns drawn. Before heading to jail, his father told him to become the man of the house and take care of his family. Since then, he's become a man of abundance, gratitude, and fortune. He is the founder and CEO of Skyline Security, one of the largest home security companies in the US. He's a pioneer and visionary who changed the legacy of his family and impacted millions. You've seen him on the hit TV series, The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, alongside his wife, Teddy Mellencamp. He's just a juggernaut in all facets of life and an extraordinary human being. Please welcome the brave, resourceful, gigantic dreamer, and audacious goal slayer, the handsome Edwin Arroyave. How you doing, Edwin?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for that intro. That was good. Nobody's ever introed me like that. That was pretty awesome.
I'm so happy to hear that because I take such pride in them. But ultimately, what I love to tell the guests is it's your story. You wrote it. I just said it.
Yeah. Well, you said it well. And thank you for that. That means the world to me.
100%, absolutely. And you and I could have chatted probably for about 3 hours before we hit record, but we got to save some of the juicy stuff here. We just met in person last week at our mutual friend Dave Meltzer's launch party, and I'm excited. I know you do a lot of these. We just crossed 1 million downloads, but we're going to have a lot of fun today. It's going to be a little bit different. Before we jump around, we're going to get a little crazy. You ready for me?
Yeah, let's go. Shoot.
Edwin, what is your superpower?
My superpower, it's funny. I literally thought, now I've identified a couple, but the other day I was listening to a good friend of mine, Ed Milet, and he was talking about how he identified his power, and he identified it back to when he was a child, right? Or a young man. And it got me thinking about what you just said about our home getting raided once a year for 4 years straight. So after our home got raided after both my parents went to jail, 8 months later, they got acquitted of all charges. And we're thinking at this moment that this nightmare is over. However, the nightmare was just beginning because every year after that, our home would get raided. And like you said, I mean, they kick front door open, kick the back door open, guns drawn, everyone to the floor. My mom was in all of these raids. She was at the house during all these raids. My dad wasn't. And my biggest superpower came out of that, which is I'm able, when the pressure's on and the heat is on, everything slows down for me. It's like it's in slow motion. And I believe I become a better person at that moment. And it's because now that I think about it, when these raids were happening, I had to be calm under pressure because I didn't want my mom to worry about me. My mom would be like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I was just calm, wasn't crying. Everybody was going crazy at the time. And I wouldn't cry. I was like, "Mom, I'm okay." And it was just calm. And as I think about it now, I'm like, oh crap, that's what happened. That's why I'm so calm under pressure, because I had to go through that pressure and resistance at a very young age. So I'd say that probably be the biggest one that I didn't really think about before, but I've always been a big dreamer. I've always had big hope, always been full of hope, big dreams. And I've had just tremendous faith. Like faith is probably, when I think about it, my number one.
Yeah. Beautifully said. So many things to unpack. The number one, with the way you were describing that, it reminds me of like Tom Brady, right? Or like an elite quarterback that's like at the end of the fourth quarter, like with all the chips are on the table, like where most people, like the game speeds up, it slows down for them and they can kind of pick the defense apart and they feel cool, calm, and collective. That is a superpower. And I want to acknowledge you for that. And then obviously you talk about faith and big goals. I mean, you combine those two, right? Thinking really big in addition to having faith. And that's a recipe for big success.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think, your goals should be audacious, right? They should be so audacious.
You use that word, by the way. It's just, it fits you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I love that word because they should be so audacious that they're so past beyond your capacity that when you accomplish them, people will know that God's hand had to be in it, because there's no way you would have been able to do that by yourself. You know, I often think that, you know, the dreams and goals that God has placed in your heart is not so you can accomplish them necessarily. It's to draw you closer to him so that you can accomplish them together. And that's why I think sometimes when you give up on your goals, and the reason I think it's crippling is because there's a part of you that I think won't get as close to your faith as you would have if you would have accomplished your dreams. And that's why I think when you accomplish your big dreams, it's one of the biggest validations about your faith. And I think if you are constantly playing it safe and you're constantly just doing the things that you know you're going to succeed at, then you're kind of squeezing God out of the formula. Because again, if you only go where you know, and you only do the things that you know you're going to succeed at, then there really is no need for God. That's why I've always loved the uncertainty and stepping into the uncertainty, because it's in the uncertainty where I know I'm going to grow. It's in the uncertainty where my need for God gets heightened. And it's in the uncertainty where he's always met me, and we've always accomplished some great things. And I think the reason people don't step into the uncertainty is because their dreams aren't big enough, right? If your dreams aren't big enough, why would you want to step into the uncertainty of something that demands more than you think you're worth?
Yeah.
Right. Because in order to get to that next level, and in order for your identity to build and your self-worth to build, is you have to experience something in your heart before you start believing in yourself. You have to experience something so that you can believe it in your heart. Well, the only way you'll experience things that demand more than you think you're worth is by stepping into the uncertainty and actually accomplishing it. If you don't accomplish it, you don't truly believe it. You don't truly believe it. You'll talk about it like, oh, I declare I'm going to do this. And that's where it starts. But until you actually accomplish, then is when you start to believe, right? And that's when you start to believe that, wait a minute, maybe I am worth $100,000 a year in your heart before you actually have the money. Maybe I am worth $1 million a year in your heart before you actually have it. Maybe I am worth 8 figures a year in your heart before you actually have it, because you're doing things that are demanding more than you think you're worth, and you're continuing it to accomplish these bigger things that demand more than you think you're worth. But again, if your dreams aren't big enough, why would you want to step into it?
Bang, you nailed it. And you mentioned Ed, he's been on the show a couple of times, as recently as a couple of weeks back, and we're talking about something similar, but I never heard it articulated the way you just said it. That's really beautiful. Like, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I just thinking about it, like, why would you step into something that was scary or uncertain unless you thought really, really big and you met that with faith, right? Because if you combine both of those, then you have confidence, even though I can't see, not the old cliche, but like the whole staircase, I could take the first step and things will begin to present themselves, so to speak. And the message there for the audience, like, guys, you got to think so big that just the very thought of these audacious goals makes you feel uneasy, uncomfortable. But then as you begin to step into them and have some success, then you start to get more excited about being uncomfortable having these big audacious goals, right?
Yeah. And I mean, you hit the nail in the head there, because it starts with the hope, right? So I'd say, like, rule number one is you have to have the hope, which are the dreams, the big purpose, right? Big enough that you want to step into the uncertainty. And that's when the faith comes in, because you realize these dreams are so big. Hey, I can't do it without God. I need God on my side on this. And part of the reason I've stepped into uncertainty, a big part of it, is I've always felt like God was with me. Like, my mom would always pray for me, because I was a very shy, timid kid. I mean, I was like beyond shy and timid. And my mom would pray over me every morning, every night. And she said, you're born to do something great. You're going to do something huge in life. And when you do, one day you're going to speak in front of a lot of people, and you're going to tell them how God was a big part of your success. And those prayers and that love gave me confidence when I took on things that demanded more than I thought I was worth, like trying to become a manager at 15 years old at the call center that I worked for, even though I couldn't even complete a sentence back then.
I know your story, and this is awesome stuff, straight up. You're an introvert?
You know what? I think back then, I just took the test and I thought I was an introvert this whole time. Apparently, I'm an extrovert.
Really?
Yep. But I think my thing was I didn't like getting in front of a lot of people, or like one-on-one. I've always been better, right? But
Yeah,
when it's a lot of people, or back then, I would just get so embarrassed and shy.
yeah.
Wasn't that I was not? It was. I think I was more low confidence. I had a lot of low confidence as a kid. So it wasn't that I was an introvert. It was just low confidence. And what would happen to me? I mean, this is how shy I was. Sometimes people don't understand how shy I was. My buddy of mine says, hey, well, I go to all these job interviews and no one would hire me. The reason no one would hire me was because during the interviews, I'd get so nervous that I'd start sweating. Like when I say sweating, like pouring in sweat, and then I couldn't complete sentences, right? So then a buddy of mine says, we're going to the same high school at the time, and he knew my situation. He knew I had to get a job and I needed to help my family because we just didn't have enough money for food, enough money for rent, the whole deal. Roaches waking me up in the middle of the night. So it was a bad situation. We lived in this tiny little bedroom with no windows. So buddy of mine says, hey, I found a job for you, because he knew the struggle. Says, and they hire anyone there. Like literally just show up. It's a call center. They'll hire you. Kind of like Boiler Room, if you ever watched the movie, right?
Of course.
So, and they start at $5.81 an hour. I was like, $5.81 an hour. I'm like, damn, this is it. So I jump into my beat up Nissan Sentra, 82 Nissan Sentra, and it had roll-up windows, right?
Yep.
And it had no shocks. So the entire 30 minutes, I'm bouncing to this job interview. And it's kind of a hot day. So as I get there, I'm already kind of hot. And I'm thinking to myself, God, please don't let me sweat during this interview. So I go to the interview. I'm getting interviewed. And of course, I start pouring in sweat. And I'm wearing a white shirt similar to the one you're wearing right now. So you could just see everything just through my body. Like you see my whole body because I'm just start drenched in sweat. And I get so nervous I can't complete sentences. Anyways, as you can imagine, I don't get hired. I'm walking out. As I'm walking out, I step into the restroom. I start washing my face and I do a little prayer. I'm like, God, just help me get a job. Like I promise you, I'll work harder than anyone's ever worked in their life. Then as I'm walking out of this place, there's a gentleman outside. He says, hey, when do you start, kid? I said, I don't start. You guys are full. He says, no, we're not. He says, come with me. He walks me over to the HR room and he says, hey, you need to hire this kid. I need this kid to start tomorrow at 3 p.m. That's the same person that 6 years later helps me start the security company that in the last 23 years has made over $400 million. So that's why I'm such a believer that in life, people just need a shot. People just need a system. People need a leader that believes in them, that's going to trust them, that's going to help them, that's going to be patient with them and show them the way. And that's what drives me today more than anything, is I want to be able to pay it forward and give people the same opportunity that I had. I literally was just one shot away. If that person wouldn't have came to me, I mean, I would not be sitting where I'm sitting at today. And one of the great things, Craig, that this company did is before we'd get on the phones to sell, it was an hour of mindset training.
That's awesome.
So I did that for 6 years nonstop. Just every hour, boom, mindset training. Now, here's the bad part. After I started my own company at 21 years old, I did what most people unfortunately do when they start their own business. They have a little too much freedom. So I stopped working on my mind. Now, from that point, I stopped studying. I did not work on my mind for the next 17 years, actually 18 years. When I say I didn't work on my mind, like I didn't pick up a book, I didn't listen to a podcast, nothing, right? And because of that, 17 years later, when I had finally surpassed what I thought I was worth for the first time in my life, I started to self-sabotage and come back down to what I really thought I was worth. And all these self-limiting beliefs that I had about myself that I had suppressed for many years came back up.
They resurfaced. Conscious. Yep.
Yeah, they resurfaced, which was you're not smart enough. You graduated with a 1.8 GPA, you sucked at school, and you're not smart enough to be running this type of company. And when that happened, I started self-sabotaging. It wasn't until I took action towards that biggest fear in my life. When I say it was my biggest fear, I could hang out with celebrities. I can hang out with the hottest chicks, the people with money. I had no problem with that. If I hung out with people that I thought were way smarter, like Ivy League people or people like that, I wouldn't even speak because I was so intimidated that they would think that I wasn't smart. So that was my biggest fear. And I finally had to attack it by picking up a book for the first time in 25 years. In fact, the last book I had picked up, obviously not including the training material that I did at the call center, but the last real book or just regular book that I'd picked up was Charlotte's Web. Which I read in the ninth.
I thought you were going to say like Think and Grow Rich.
No. It was Charlotte's Web in the ninth grade. And now that I have daughters, I realized I should have read it in the fifth grade.
Right.
But that was the last book I had picked up. And finally, I picked up a book by Grant Cardone called 10X.
Yep.
And what was interesting about that book, well, the reason I did it is because all my sales guys were infatuated with him. So I was like, man, I need to find out who this guy is. So at first, I couldn't retain the information when I was reading it. That was my problem with reading. So then I had to get the audio version, couldn't retain that either.
Can't focus.
So then I literally had to hit stop, play, stop, play. And I literally would write a sentence. That's how I was able to retain it. I basically wrote probably 75% of the book out.
Yep.
And here's the best part about it. As I finally retained the information, I realized, oh crap, I've done all of this. I just didn't know how to articulate it.
Yeah.
So remember how I said, Craig, you don't believe something in your heart until you experience it?
Yes.
Well, now that I saw this guy, Ed Milet at the time, Grant Cardone at the time, who was worth hundreds of millions of dollars at the time, basically talking about his success came about everything I had been doing as well. My subconscious mind started to believe what my conscious mind was saying. And I started to think, well, shoot, maybe I am worth $100 million because I literally just did the same thing this guy did. That's what I've been doing my whole life. Maybe I am this good. Yep. And then sure enough, from there, Ed Milet calls me to come out on, well, from there, I start studying Ed Milet and I start realizing that everything he's talking about, I've also done. I just didn't know how to articulate it.
Yep.
So my confidence just went through the roof, right? Now I believed it because I had experienced it. And then I believe that once your subconscious mind meets what your conscious mind is saying and you eliminate doubt, God starts putting all the right people in front of you to make the impossible possible. And all of a sudden, everyone starts to show up and it just starts aligning itself. And just boom.
I'm laughing because the only negative I got going on is we don't have 10 hours to chat because this is gold. So much to unpack there. And yeah, like if you don't upgrade your identity, you can have more success. But again, if your identity is all the way down here, then you'll find ways to self-sabotage, right? And hell yeah, that you were doing all those things. They just weren't articulated. And it's true. I've been talking a lot lately about the subconscious, how it's been programmed since we were 7 or 12 years old, typically negative, in a loop, kind of like the Matrix. But if you, like you just said, like you can meet that with your conscious, what you're telling yourself now, then it's game over or game on, right? However you would look at it. Then doors begin to open, the seas begin to part, and so forth. And for the audience listening, it's so valuable because don't believe you're self-conscious, right? It's a false reality. It's what's been programmed in there for decades, but you can change that the moment that you become aware and mindful of your thoughts. And the last thing I want to say about that is I can also relate to that. There was a stretch a couple of years back where I stopped sharpening the axe, as I like to say, or reading and stuff like that. And what's so fascinating to me is if you want to look good or get in shape, you got to be physically fit, right? But what people don't talk about enough is the most important thing is to stay mentally fit. And you got to work on this stuff every single day. And it's so interesting that when you took a little bit of a hiatus, as did I at some point, I started to get in a little bit of a rut. But as soon as you get back on and you start feeding yourself the positivity, I mean, it changes everything.
100%. And that's the same way I looked at it. I'm like, wait a minute, I've been working out since I was 18. Why don't I do the same thing on my mind? And I made a commitment in 2016, 17 to start at least 30 minutes a day working on my mind, no matter what. And now the few times that I don't, I feel like crap. Just the same way, like if I don't work out of my body, I feel like crap that day. It's just, I'm not the same person. Like if I want to be my optimal self, I work on my mind. And then from there, I do my workout. And I usually do it in the morning, right? I like to get those things out of the morning, but it's a must. And the other thing that I'd say about that too is whenever you need to reprogram that self-conscious, to your point, it's inevitable. You're going to have a big struggle in your hand. It's not going to be easy. Like reading for me was not easy. I mean, it was hard. I mean, like I said, I had to like write down, and that hour, what somebody probably could have done in, well, what my wife would have learned in 20 minutes would take me about 3.5 hours. Because it was just hard for me to retain the information, but I was just still grinding. And then when you got nothing left is where everything is created, right? That's out of the nothing comes everything. When you got nothing left, boom, is when everything is created. And that's what happened to me is I had nothing left. I'm like, I'm not quitting. I'm going to read this damn book. I don't care what it takes. And then everything was created from there. I mean, the type of leader I've become since then. I mean, I was good before, but like I couldn't get in front of crowds. Now I can't even. 5-6 years ago, I would have never shared my story. I would have been too nervous. I would have been too in my head about it. I didn't want to tell people. In fact, you talk about the right people coming, you know, when your subconscious mind meets your conscious mind, the right people start showing up. All of a sudden that year, my wife and I booked The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, which then gets Grant Cardone to say, hey, you want to come out on my show? And then from there, Ed Milet liked it so much, he called me and said, hey, you want to come out on my show? And then I ended up doing the two of the biggest podcasts right off the bat. And I wasn't even a guy that was used to going on podcasts. And like I said, I had this very self-confidence when it came to, you know, having to speak in front of big crowds and stuff like that. And sure enough, I got to tell you, that Grant interview was, man, I was so nervous. I slept 1 hour that night. Like, man, if I start fumbling, Grant's going to just chew me up. Yeah. And I had prepared so much for that interview that I couldn't get it wrong. Like I thought about every question he could ask me, because I get my confidence from preparation.
Preparation needs confidence.
It's how I kind of have this mindset of an overachiever, right? And that's how I, for many years, surpassed. That's how for many years I had to fight off that self-limiting belief that I wasn't very smart, right? I was like, well, if I just work harder, if I have more discipline, if I have more faith, if I have more perseverance, if I have more integrity, I could beat people out. And that's, again, I was able to beat out people for many years until that day finally came where I finally surpassed what I thought I was worth. And that's why, just like you, Craig, a big passion for me is personal development. In fact, my company now has become really a personal development company that just happens to be a sales organization, an install organization for solar and home security. But at the core, we're really a personal development company because I am very passionate about building people's identity. Because you could have all the talent in the world, you're never going to out-earn your self-worth.
That's it. There's so much synergy here, a lot of alignment. Me too, in regards to preparation, breeding confidence, right? Like people always say, it's like, wow, you're a really good interviewer. You've been doing this for a long time. Like, no, but I do a lot of prep, and that gives me confidence and so forth. And there's so many different ways we could take this conversation. What I think the audience should do, if they're not familiar with you, is go check out Edwin's content, his Instagram, all the stuff he's got going on, play catch up. What's most valuable right now is we just have an unbelievable conversation. Something that I heard you say somewhere, and I just think it was so beautiful, is that it's not so much the goal as it is the person you become on your journey to chasing your goals. And so I think that's going to hit home for the audience. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, first of all, awesome. Craig, you talk about preparation. I could tell you prepared for this interview. By the way, immediately shows someone that you care about them, which then immediately makes me like you, right? Because all people want is they want to be seen, right? And if you can, the two of the things that the best things you could give someone is your attention, right? And your presence, right? more than money, more than anything, if you could have my attention and my presence, that's the best gift I can give you. So when you show that to someone, it means the world to them, right? And especially as you get more successful, you believe it or not, you become more alone, right? Because you're constantly pouring out instead of getting poured into, right? And when someone takes the time to really learn your story or show that they care about you, you really make an impact in their life. Because again, most people struggle. It's inevitable. And when you struggle is when you feel the most alone in your life and like you don't matter. So if you could just show somebody that you see them, it means the world to them. I can't tell you how many times I get hit up, Craig. Oh, I could blow up your Instagram. Oh, I could take you here. I could take you there. And I could tell they've done no research on you. Versus if they actually had said what you said at the introductory of this call, I would have been like, oh, I'll give this guy a shot. He actually he cared about it. He cared about my story, and he actually does like my story. So maybe I do want to work with him, right? Versus just some mass text that got sent out to 1,000 people where you don't feel exclusive. I'm like, dude, I'm just like the other 100 people you DM'd, right?
Yep.
So anyways, I know that wasn't the question, but I wanted to
appreciate that.
I wanted to give you major props on that because not a lot of people do that.
Thank you.
So anyway, so that's number one. But yeah, the purpose of a goal is not necessarily to achieve it, but to become the person that actually attempts it.
This ties into your identity talk.
Exactly. And for me, that's been the story of my life. I've just been great at attempting things and not being afraid, not letting that fear paralyze me, right? Because the only way you truly start to believe something is by experiencing it. And the only way you'll ever experience it is by taking a shot, right? Like one of my favorite athletes of all time, well, not one, my favorite athlete of all time is Kobe Bryant. And the reason he's one of my favorite athletes, well, why he's my favorite athlete of all time is because when I first got that promotion at 18 years old at the call center to become a manager, I was so fearful because now I was managing people that were twice my age, a lot smarter than me. Some were going to college, and here I was still in high school, about to graduate, and I'm managing 40 people. And I looked at Kobe at the time, who was a rookie at the time, and he just didn't care. Like he was just shooting. Like he wasn't attached to the outcome, right? And I think when you attach yourself to the outcome of something, that's where you kind of choke, right? Yep. And he wasn't, right? He just went by the feeling of it, not the thinking of it, right? Because if you think about it, then that's where you're going to lose, right? Now, you got the idea is to think about it. Think of that big old goal you want. For me, it was like, man, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to buy my mom her house by 21 years old. That was me obsessed with it. But when it came down to execution, I now was detached from the outcome, right? So with Kobe Bryant, maybe you're too young to remember this, but when he was a rookie against the Utah Jazz, he airballed 5 times. It had never been seen before. At the end of the game, in the playoffs, nobody wants to, well, I don't know if nobody else wanted to shoot, but he just literally would come down, shoot, airball, come back right down, shoot, airball. I think it was 4 or 5 in a row. And of course, they lose the game and they get kicked out of the playoffs, right? Everybody's on his butt about who is this guy? He sucks. He can't make a shot, blah, 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 blah. Well, most people would have never shot the ball again. Not under that circumstance. I mean, airballing 4 in a row is big, especially when the game's on the line. What does he do the next year? He shoots it even more. What happens is, if you get enough shots, eventually it's going to hit. And the more it hits, the more results you get. And the more results you get, the more confident you get. And all of a sudden, you can detach yourself from the outcome because you know you've done it so many times It's just a matter of time before it goes in, right?
Nailed it.
So that's the beauty about, I think, about going through the struggle, because the only way you get to that point, Ed calls it equanimity. And it's that calmness when everything is getting derailed, right? And everything slows down for you and you become better as the pressure comes on. It comes about because you've done it over and over and over. Well, think about it. If you're the type of person that when the pressure comes, you run away, then how are you ever going to experience it and believe that you can be the person that makes it happen?
You're not.
You can't. Right. So you got to go through the struggle. And that's why I've always said struggle is a good thing, because when you struggle, you build the muscle that you need to sustain success. That's why you see people that have, everyone that you see with success, where it came easy to them, they eventually lose it because they never built the muscles to sustain success when life punches you in the face. And you know, Craig, you're always going to get punched in the face by life.
Inevitable.
Life and pain, inseparable.
Yep.
It's one.
Yeah.
And when these, I think you're seeing it a lot in crypto right now, right? There's a lot of people that were making easy money.
That's right.
In crypto, thought they were on top of the world, never worked hard for it. And now they're just getting smashed. And now, because they've never built the muscles, the doubt sets in and they're done.
Right. You nailed all of it. So much to unpack here. A quote that I love to say is, marry the process, divorce the outcome, right? And this is something that I learned a couple of years back. When you're attached to an outcome, it just builds a lot of stress, right? But if you're able to revert back to your training, like a Navy SEAL, so you have the intention, I'm going to buy my mom a house, and then you release it, bless and release, and then just do the work. Then it takes off the pressure, right? And you can kind of just focus on doing what you got to do. I think that's so key for the audience. In anything, it's universal and applicable for anything that you want to do.
Yeah. And just to tie this up for people, that the reason I was able to detach was because I was willing to go through the struggle. So let me give you an example. When I first started knocking on doors, the reason I became successful at it wasn't because I was this great salesperson. It was because I would knock doors. I wouldn't leave the field until I got a sale. And I can't tell you how many times I got a deal on the last door that I knocked on. Sometimes it was 9:30 at night. Sometimes it was 10:30 at night. In fact, back then I had one of my partners always try to pick me up around 8 o'clock. The reason he wanted to pick me up at 8 o'clock is so we could BS for an hour while everybody else kept working. I literally would hide in the bushes, Craig. Literally, because I didn't want him to distract me, because I'm like, I ain't leaving till I get a sale. So I keep knocking. At 9:30, 10 o'clock, I'd get a sale, right? So that sale got me the result, got me the confidence. And then I would do it over and over again. So what ended up happening was the customer, I never looked desperate in front of the customer. That's the reason people don't buy from you, is you look desperate.
They can smell it.
They can tell that you're going to make money on them. That's the reason they don't get it, and they don't trust you, right? So I can't tell you how many times it was 8:30 at night. I didn't have a sale. I'd been getting my ass kicked for 7 hours. I was calm. And I was calm because I had gotten a deal so many times at 9:30. I knew it was just a matter of time. So it's a lot easier for you to detach from the outcome when you're operating out of abundance, when you're operating out of massive action, right? It's why when you finally make some money, you don't want to take a vacation right away and kill your momentum, because now you're back to looking desperate because your bank doesn't have abundance, right? But when you're like, man, I got so many accounts, whether you get it or not, man, I'm banking anyway. Easier to not be so attached to the outcome.
Right. And that obviously takes some practice. And you talk about abundance. I know it's a buzzword these days, and, you got to be available for it, right? Like most people operate in scarcity and so forth, or they think that when they define how to manifest, they think that you manifest what you want. The truth of the matter is you don't manifest what you want. You manifest what you are, right? The vibration that you're giving off. But you have to raise your hand. You have to say, I'm a match for the abundance out there. You have to believe it and feel it, like future gratitude, like thankful that it already happened. You have to make yourself available for all the abundance out there. You can't just think it, right?
100%. So, I mean, yeah, abundance is, it's everything. It's how you give, right? As much as people want to say you got to give, and obviously you want to serve first. I'm a byproduct of servant leadership, but it's a lot easier to serve when you have abundance, right? When you don't have a dime in your pocket, it's a little harder for you to be served first, right? So, but yeah, no, abundance. I mean, if you just show people that you care, as simple and as elementary as that sounds, people are going to want to follow you, right? If you serve people first, and I'm a byproduct of, first of all, always having a mentality of outlasting the competition. I knew when I first started the business, I knew that I couldn't compete with the big dogs at that time. I was new, but I leveraged what I had going for myself, which was I was 21 years old. So I said to myself, I won't beat them now, but I'll eventually outlast them. And if I could just be consistent, eventually I will pass them up. And that's been the secret to my success. Now, why is that relative? Well, because whenever you're thinking about long-term, you got to think about people first. If you think about people first, you're always going to win long-term. Too many people are short-sighted. They're thinking short-term, and that's why they burn a lot of relationships, which is why they're not around long-term. So it might take you a little longer to do things the right way, but now you'll sustain success for a long time.
Sustainability, that's it. And this is just great, straight up. Like, let me know if you know a good surgeon. You have to surgically remove the smile from my face with this conversation. Another thing that you always talk about that I think is really important to hammer home here for the audience is taking action before you have what you need. I love that you talk about that.
Yeah, that's faith, right? So it starts with hope. Hope is the desire of wanting it. If you don't have the hope or the desire, why would you want to get it, right? And then the faith is just taking action before you have what you need. That means believing something before you actually have it, right? So taking action before you have what you need, for me, is you becoming, you knowing that I'm a money-making machine. The money's on its way. So I might as well take action before I have it. Yeah, I don't have the money for this house yet, but I know the money's coming. So you know what? I'm going to go to that open house. And what happens when you go to that open house, two things happen. When you take action before you have what you need, two things happen. Number one, it sends a signal to God saying you do have faith. You see, everything is reciprocal. And if you want something, you have to give it first. So if you want faith to act on your side, guess who's got to take the first step? You do, right? So you take the first step, even though you don't have the money, you're a money-making machine, you go to the open house. Now you go to the open house. The second thing that happens, they give you a blueprint on what you need to make it happen. Then you break it down to the ridiculous. The more you can break it down to the ridiculous, the more attainable it becomes. The more attainable it becomes, the more realistic it becomes, the more you're going to want to get off your butt to make it happen. Because what causes you to take action is your ability to think you can get a result. So for those of people that are listening, I want you to write this down because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. What causes you to take action is the ability to think you can get a result. To the degree that you think you can get a result is going to be to the degree that you want to take more action. Like if you knew that every door you knocked on, you were going to get $100, you literally can knock doors for 3 days. You wouldn't be tired because you know you're getting a result. So that's why you want to get to the point. And then the last part that happens is you have a date on when you're going to do it by. The deadline creates the urgency to go get it. And then you go after it like your life depends on it. And what people have to know about this formula, becoming is the taking action before you have what you need. Then you take action. Then it's have a date on when you're going to do it by. Well, right before you're about to accomplish your dream, you're probably going to get punched in the face harder than you've ever been punched.
Fact.
And that's when you got to make a decision. Do you spring back forward and continue to focus and continue to push forward? And here's the key. focusing on the things that you can control, not and having faith that all this stuff here on the left side that makes you think that it's impossible, you just have faith that God's going to put the right people in front of you if you just continue to focus on the things that you can control. And I can't tell you how many times I've been able to accomplish some impossible, it almost seems like miracles, just by me focusing on what I can control and not quitting. Too many people quit before the blessing comes because it looks impossible. Yeah. So that formula is first you become, then you take action, then you have whatever it is that you want in life. I could sit here for 3 hours and share with you stories on how I've accomplished the impossible just with that formula.
Yeah. First you become, right? Mm-hmm. Not what do I need to do, but what do I need to become to achieve all the ends that I desire? This is awesome stuff. And also, like, one thing that our buddy Ed talks about a lot too, and I agree, it seems like you do as well, is for those budding entrepreneurs, the people that want to achieve mass success, like, spoiler alert, adversity will hit. So you better negotiate the price in advance. Be prepared, because it will happen. And if you have that mindset, then when it does happen, instead of getting crippled, you'll lean into it, because you know all life's real growth happens on the backside of pain. Would you agree with that?
100%. I think life and pain, when you really think about it, are inseparable. I mean, when you were born, you probably...
That sounds so beautiful, by the way. Life and pain are inseparable.
It's inseparable. And think about it. When we're first born, we give our moms probably the biggest pain they've ever had in their life.
Right.
And literally seconds later, they got the most joy they've ever had in their life.
That's a good point.
Right? You think about Jesus Christ, he went through the biggest pain in life to save us, right? For those of you that are Christian, right? So it's inevitable that, and here's another way to prove it to you guys. What gives us fulfillment, two things that give us fulfillment: growth, which is why you want to continue to grow until your last days on earth, and contribution. Those are the only two things that give you real fulfillment. It's not money, it's contribution and growth. Well, the only way you grow is to go through pain, is to go through resistance. So that's why the idea is, as you continue to accomplish and do great things in all areas of your life, you got to constantly have hope, which is a new purpose. Hope is purpose, right? So no matter what success you get in life, you always have to have a new hope, because hope means something you're looking forward to. If you have no hope, then you got nothing to look forward to. And if you don't have hope, you have despair. And that's why you're constantly trying to just challenge yourself at all times in different areas of your life so that you can get better. And that's where I find that you have the most happiness.
So interesting. There was a time not too long ago where I was a bit more immature and not evolved, maybe 7 years ago, when I was on Wall Street. And I used to think that happiness was measured by success from a monetary standpoint. Ultimately, you realize it's not true. It's measured by how happy you are and how big of an impact you make, or the word that you used, contributing, right? Like, I used to get validation if somebody like complimented me on something that I had, right? But now where I get validation is when someone comes up to me and goes, "Hey, Craig, I listened to your podcast," or "I was at your speech and you really said something that helped me take action. You really changed my perspective." Like, that's what it's all about. And you articulated it beautifully. You nailed it. Like, contribution leads to the utmost fulfillment.
100%. I mean, it's what drives me at work more than anything. It's just, I want to be able to give people that same opportunity that I had, you know, and when you can do it, it's, I mean, there's nothing like it. I mean, we just had a kid 6 months ago come in, couldn't complete a sentence. He's probably one of my favorite guys because it just reminds me of me so much. And now he's making $70,000 a month. And literally 6 months ago, I'm not exaggerating, could not complete a sentence, but had a big dream. Big hope. His big hope was to bring his family from the Philippines. He had a daughter back in the Philippines that was a year old, and his wife was down there, and he was a chef, but he realized, which is actually very common sense stuff, right? Success, making 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures is not as complicated as people think. You just need two things. You need to find an opportunity that allows you to make that kind of money. And the second thing you need, which is probably the hardest, is you need to find someone who's done it before, who's got a vested interest in your success, that's going to help you do it. And if you can find those two things, the only reason you wouldn't make 6, 7, 8 figures if you don't put the work. but we don't have to complicate it, right? Like for me, at 21 years old, I was already making $70,000 a year at the call center.
Yep.
But my dreams were bigger than that. And I knew that, well, I need to make at least 100 grand a year, because that's the number I was infatuated with since I was 12 years old. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. It's the story of my life, Craig. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to figure it out. And at 12 years old, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make 100 grand, but I'm going to figure it out. So all I did was find an opportunity that allowed me to make that kind of money. Why would I work at a place where I already know there's no opportunity to make that kind of money, if that's my real dream? Makes sense? And again, I didn't want to knock on doors. That's the last thing I wanted to do, was go door to door selling. And I didn't know, people always talk about their passion. That was not my passion at that time. However, over 23 years, guess what? It's evolved to my biggest passion that you and I have in common, which is changing people's lives.
That's it. Yeah.
Right? Because now I have a vehicle. I could give them all the success principles, but now I could also say, oh, by the way, I got a vehicle for you to make 6, 7, 8 figures a year.
Yeah, that's it. And I love that you talked about, like, throughout your life, and for me too, like, the how isn't as important as to the why. Right? Like, as long as you have an intention and you have the desire and you have a reason, the how will present itself. Right? Like you said, like, God will present the right person at the right time when you never saw it coming. It's second nature to just kind of taking action and diving in straight up. And the last thing I wanted to ask you before we land the plane is, I've heard you talk about, like, touching the dream, right? Like, if you don't have what you desire yet, but you're starting to become the person that's available for it, to go out there and touch the dream, right? Like, for an example, like, test drive that new car, try on that Rolex, stay at the Ritz for a night, whatever the case would be, but keep that dream close to you so it feels realistic, right?
100%. So yeah, touching the dream is part of that. I mean, we just talked about it in a sense, is that if you don't know what that dream is, I mean, if you never touch the dream, how are you supposed to know it exists? You're never going to want to improve on something that you don't know exists. You want to become aware. And one of the things that, for me, again, I talk about the why. The why for me is, I had this huge why of, I promised my dad at 10 years old that when he get out of jail, he'd never have to work a day in his life. Since I was 21, he's never had to work again. I promised my mom that I'd buy her dream house. I was able to do that at 21 years old. But the other thing I had was that I had these huge dreams. I was this kid that at 16, 17 years old would go to Hollywood Hills and Beverly Hills, and I would just look at the homes all day long. And I was like, man, look at these homes. And I would envision what my house would look like. And my vision was so specific. I wanted the house on the edge of the hill. I didn't want no house in front of mine. And the first house I bought in Hollywood Hills had a beautiful view, but there was homes in front of it. And I remember saying to myself, every day when I would wake up, I'd look at the house that I really wanted, which was the house in front of that had nobody in front of it. And I'd be like, one day that house is going to be mine. But touching the dream when I was 16, 17, 18 years old got me outside of the bubble of Huntington Park. It got me to see that there was bigger things out there than Huntington Park. So when I started making 70 grand a year and everybody was telling me how great I was, I realized I was this tiny still. I'm like, wait a minute, there's still a whole different world out there that's way bigger than this little bubble that I'm in. And then touching the dream also made my subconscious mind go and find opportunities to make that dream happen. And that ties back to your reticular activating system, which is, I tie a lot of my success to that. But, you have to reward yourself. And again, it goes back to reward yourself by touching the dream. And this goes back to the abundance mentality versus the scarcity mentality. See, scarcity mentality, they want to hoard all of their money. And the reason they want to hoard all of their money is because they think that it's going to go away. So what ends up happening is they never go touch the dream. And because they never go touch the dream, they get complacent. And because they become complacent, they're waiting to have something to finally take action, to then finally become whatever it is that they want to become. And the chances of that happening are slim to none. What will happen is life's going to punch them in the face, drop them down, And at that point, either take all of their savings, if not all of it, and then you're left in this vicious cycle of trying to have enough money to finally take action, to finally become whatever it is that you want to become, versus when you finally become, you go touch the dream before you have what you need. You go spend $200, $300 on a nice dinner, because then you're like, wait a minute, I want to keep coming to this place. And the only way I'm going to keep coming to this place is if I keep working my butt off, right? And then it compels you to want to work harder, which then allows you to experience more things that make you believe even more. So that's why, like, my why when I was 21 years old, other than my parents, my dreams were very materialistic. But I loved that they were very materialistic because they allowed me not to settle. My first home in Woodland Hills was an amazing, beautiful home. People thought I paid $5 million for that house. It was as dream home as you can get, but it still wasn't my real dream. So I still fought harder for my house in Hollywood Hills, but by wanting that house in Hollywood Hills, it made me step into more circumstances that demanded more than I thought I was worth. And then eventually I had so many of these experiences like, oh, wait a minute, I can't afford $1 million house. Oh, wait a minute, I can't afford a $3 million house. Oh, wait a minute, I can't afford 3 houses that are worth that. But it was always scary. Like when I first bought my first $1 million house, I was like, oh shit, can I afford this or can I not? Right? Like, let's be real. Like I was scared a little bit. And then you realize like, wait a minute, I can't afford it. But you're never going to know that until you experience it. And I've seen so many people, because they got a bad relationship with money or their self-worth isn't high enough, they settle. And because they settle, they never go past their own capacity to realize that their self-worth is actually way bigger, right?
That's it.
Their identity is higher.
Yeah, my favorite takeaway personally from this episode, and there's so many, but what really lands for me is that what you're saying, and this is awesome for the audience, a little over 1 million now, is that when he says become the person, that's before you actually tangibly have the assets that you desire. So for example, earlier on in the conversation, Edwin said, become the money-making machine and then go to the open house, right? Even though you don't have that stuff yet, the identity is now been upgraded. You've reinvented yourself. So it's only a matter of time before you have those things that you desire. So it's eternal first. Your internal creates your external, so to speak. And anybody could essentially begin that today.
Yeah. Now, the one thing I'd say to that, Craig, is the disclaimer to that. Yeah. And the reason I've always been good at taking action before I had what I needed, obviously the faith in God. But here's one thing that we take for granted. I've always kept the promises I shouldn't say always, but 90% of the time, if not more, I've always kept the promises I made to myself.
That's key.
So because of that, I really had the confidence to do it, right? So even when I bought that $1 million house, yeah, it was scary, but I'd always kept the promises I made to myself, right? I was always disciplined. And as I think back, because remember, my life, I've had a reverse engineer.
Yeah.
Right. And the one thing in common that I have with being able to take action before I had what I needed and getting myself into pressure, putting myself in pressure situations. Here's a fast one I'll give you. The first car I bought, would change my life forever, was an Eclipse. This is something I've been trying to buy for like 3 years in my life.
Wow.
But I used to think, this is before I started thinking differently. Before, I used to think like most people, first have, take action, become. So I kept trying to save enough money to buy my dream car at the time. I was 18 years old, which was a 96 Mitsubishi Eclipse.
I remember that car.
The more I would try to save money, the more it would go away. My mom would say, oh, I need you to help me with this. I need to send some money to grandma, blah, blah, blah. So finally I end up buying, I had this 240 SX, which was nice. And not that nice, but it was decent. Like, I'm never going to be able to afford this Mitsubishi Eclipse. So why don't I just buy myself some rims? And I bought myself some 17-inch rims at the time, which were $3,000, which back then cost more than the car.
Chromies?
Yeah. So literally I buy these rims and I'm like, okay, well, now the car looks nice enough where I don't want to buy the Mitsubishi Eclipse. Well, had those rims for one day. That same day, I get carjacked at gunpoint. They steal my car. I find it 5 days later on blocks. The rims are gone. The savings that I had is pretty much gone. That same week, I get laid off by the call center that I was working at. And I remember being so discouraged and being so pissed off at my parents, because I kept saying to myself, man, I don't have any, I've been working my ass off at this company for 3.5 years. I got nothing to show for it because I've been giving everything to my parents. And I remember jumping on the 105 freeway to the 605. This is for those people that live in California. And I remember passing through the Mitsubishi dealership that I'd see all the time. I remember thinking to myself, looking at the dealership and saying, man, that dream's never going to happen. And then like that, a voice came and said, Edwin, what are you so afraid of? Everything you've done, you've always figured out a way to get to the top. Why don't you just get out of the exit right now, make a U and buy your car? I literally exited the freeway, made a U-turn, went into the dealership with no job, came out of there with a $30,000 car. Now, at the time, I'm not saying go do that, but the disclaimer of that, I mean, when I look back at it, it was because I kept the promises I made to myself. So, that moment is when I finally became, right? And the way I justified it too, when I did it, I was like, well, if I get the car, then I'm not going to want to receive unemployment, because I was going to get unemployment. I think it was like $500 every 2 weeks that they would have gave me. And I was like, no, that's going to make me get lazy. I want a bill because that's going to make me have the urgency to go get the car. Yeah. What I didn't know, it wasn't that I was this risk taker. It was just that I believed that because I'd always kept the promises I made to myself, I could make it happen. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, the call center calls me back and gives me about a 25% raise, and I start making 60 grand a year.
That's it. What an awesome story.
And that's the first time I became. That changed my life forever. I was never the same again.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
This is awesome. I can't believe this is what we do for a living. Like this isn't work to me. Best part about all this is that just the beginning of the friendship. This was fun. This was an awesome.
Yeah.
We're going to do a lot more stuff together. The audience is exploding. What's the best way for the community and for 1 Million Strong to support you, Edwin?
Probably Instagram. That's probably the one I use the most. It's at Tedwinator. It's TEDWINATRO. The reason that I have that name is I used to share it with my wife before she became famous.
I know you did.
The agreement I made with her is I'd never have my own. And then when she became famous, she let me have my own. But she said, hey, all I ask is that you don't change the name. So she'll give in eventually to just let me use my name instead of Tedwinator.
That's awesome. I'm going to connect with you also personally on Instagram after this. Great name, by the way. You should never change that. How can I personally support you, brother?
Just, anybody that that needs a vehicle. I have a great vehicle. Again, we're in the smart home and solar business, which just happens to be two industries that are recession proof. Fear sharpens listening. When people are scared, all of a sudden they get reminded of what matters most. And what matters most to people is their family. And usually their biggest asset is their home. And we get to protect it. And then you have smart home, which hasn't even really begun. It's the Internet of Things. So these are all things that are out there that are recession proof. And then the other one is solar. You can never be too broke not to have power. No matter how broke you are, you have to pay your power bill. Right. And solar basically cuts people's most of the time cuts people's bills in half. And they both pay very well. And if you have the right principles of success, it's a perfect vehicle to now apply them. And again, like I said, you need to find an opportunity that allows you to make 6, 7, 8 figures a year.
Yeah.
You need to find someone who's done it before, who's got a vested interest in your success, that's going to help you do it. So if you have any people like that need an opportunity, that need a shot, that all I ask, Craig, is that they want to dream big. If they want to make $2,000 a week minimum, then I want to talk to them. And they have to realize that I want them to still go after their dreams and realize that if they keep doing what they're doing, those dreams are never going to happen. And at some point, if they want that dream to happen, they're going to have to step into the uncertainty of probably something that demands more than they think they're worth. And eventually you want to give yourself a shot, because just from experience, when I made that decision at 21 years old to leave that job that was paying me $70,000 a year, that was just a 9-to-5, I thought to myself, I don't want to get to an age where I look back at my life and say, man, I got stuck being average just because I was never willing to take a shot.
Same. Yeah, beautifully said. And to answer your question, I only surround myself with big thinkers and big dreamers. That's the frequency that me and you are on.
Yeah.
That's why we get along so well. Edwin, I want you to know you're the definition of perspective, heart, and gratitude. From taking your life experience to spreading positivity, light, and deep truths. You're a true gladiator, visionary, role model, and beacon of hope for anybody coming up today with big goals and aspirations. I could personally guarantee your best is yet to come. Keep on spreading your wings and leaving your mark on this world. So much love and respect for you. Thank you so much for stopping by and dropping these priceless nuggets today, Edwin.
Craig, it's been an honor. Thank you for having me.
That was too much fun, brother.
That was fun, man. We're rolling. I think this is one of my best ones. I've done a lot, but you asked great questions. You're a great interviewer. You obviously did the research. I've said things on this podcast that I've never said before.
I know.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, we let it rip. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it.